I'm gonna be.
What is up, Facebook land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I am your host, Matt Cubbler, and before I introduce my special guest, Shannon Jaccard, I want to dedicate a show. I thought about this one, and because Shannon and I share something that is not necessarily unique to us, but it is a very select club of having someone who's lost a sibling. There's no greater pain that I know of that I've ever felt than losing my brother, and I'm sure Shannon feels the same way. So for anybody who's lost somebody, especially a sibling, this show is dedicated to you guys. The podcast, where can you hear it? You can hear it on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast, you name it, you can find it in one of those major players in the podcast space. I've made a conscientious decision to promote my book, which I've never done before because someone told me, you wrote a damn book, tell people about it. So My Brother's Love, a memoir. You can find it on Amazon. There, I plugged it. So Shannon was introduced to me from another podcast host and said she'd be a great guest. And I'm really excited to speak to her. She is an author. She is a mental health expert and advocate. She's a West Coaster, so she's out in San Diego. So nobody feels sad for the fact that it's a little warm today in San Diego. For those of us in the East Coast or the Philly area, we know what it feels like to be 90 and 99% humidity. So there's nothing beautiful about Philadelphia, even though that TV show says it's always sunny in Philadelphia. Without further ado, Shannon Jaccard, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. When we were introduced, I didn't really know anything about you. You didn't know anything about me. But your story resonated. Obviously, the connectivity points of losing a sibling. But I think the way that you've approached your life as far as the mission you're on and the things you've accomplished in life have a lot to do, as did my journey with having lost my brother, has a lot to do with where I'm at today. And I think that losing your brother has a lot to do with where you're at today. Mm-hmm. So the show is pretty simple. I ask one question, you talk, and I wait till you stop talking, and then I ask more questions. But talk as long as you need to. If you're on a roll, I'm going to let you just run with it. So I ask one question, and that question is, who is Shannon Jaccard?
Mm-hmm. So, in many ways, it's a really hard question. And I find that a lot of us probably have experienced who we are, and that shifts at different points in our life. So, like the day my brother was brought home when I was 4 years old, who I was before to who I was when he came home was different. I went from being an only child to what I thought was a baby that was meant for me. He clearly was mine, right? I was 4 years older, and therefore the mom. And that always ticked him off as we grew up. And then there are other moments that my life changed when he received a diagnosis of schizophrenia. That was a huge who is Shannon changed again. And 6 years after his diagnosis with his death, that'd be another change. And I've recently gone through another one. If anyone out there has lost a sibling and they've done something in the name of their sibling, people will come up to you often and say, gosh, you're honoring your brother so much. You're honoring your sister so much. And it actually pigeonholes you. It forces you to think, gosh, I got to keep doing this, because if I don't, then maybe my brother will think in heaven or wherever he is that I don't love him enough to keep doing it. And recently I came to the point that, no, he knows how much I loved him, and I've always loved him. And now I have to reflect on me and make those shifts. So who Shannon is has changed. But I'll go back to who Shannon was before. So I was a big sister. I was the type of person that, taught my brother how to tie his shoes. I taught him how to ride a bike. I was always looking out for him. I would hold his hand to walk the street, push him in the stroller. That was me. And if you're a big sibling, a lot of times the oldest behaves like that, like this second parent, much to our younger sibling's chagrin, but that's birth order for you. And then as he got older, we started noticing some things that we weren't sure. Were they just kind of teenage angst issues, or was it something more serious? And because of our age difference, I had moved out when he was only 14. So he was entering his high school, which are, some of the hardest years really of our lives, without me, because I left to go to college. I wasn't that far away, but I wasn't at home anymore. And we thought originally he was just kind of skipping class here or there. He started smoking pot. So we thought, again, it's just typical high school stuff going on. And then he started speaking about God and how God was telling him things to do. And he would go up into his room and wouldn't come out. He would make a beautiful plate of food and then say he was unworthy and not eat it. So now we kind of knew something, more serious was going on. But our family only knew about drug and alcohol. And most families are kind of taught something or know something related to drug and alcoholism, but very few of us know anything when it comes to mental illness. It's just not spoken about at all. What we're taught is basically on TV, which is completely wrong in all sense of whatever's out there. And so we sent my brother to a drug and alcohol place, which probably was a good thing for a while, because he did definitely survive off of alcohol, mostly because the only way that he could relate to friends is if they were doing something that helped them have voices just like he was experiencing. So he went to this place, and I remember the day that I dropped him off at the airport to go. My parents were taking him, and feeling this mixture of complete grief and complete happiness at the same time. Because for a period of time, he would be gone. And I wouldn't have to deal with this constant talk about, how he was the next savior and all this stuff that was going on. And yet I felt completely guilty because I needed a break and I didn't want him around for a period of time. So he went, and he hadn't had the diagnosis yet, and they didn't know what to do with him. And I remember when I went to visit, not feeling very comfortable with the place either. So we brought him back home, went to a doctor, and that's when he was given this word called schizophrenia. And my brother, if you don't know this, schizophrenia is probably the most stigmatized disorder there is out there. And he lost all of his friends, even though in high school when he was voted class clown, he was somebody that had a ton of friends. People flocked to him all the time. When he got his diagnosis, everybody just bailed. And he used to go up to people and say, "Hi, my name is Jeff. I have schizophrenia." And I would say, "Why are you telling them? They don't need to know. It's none of their business." And he would say to me, "Shannon, I want them to leave me before I start to care about them." And that says a lot about this particular illness. So I started telling my brother, we don't care about the name. The name is for insurance, truly. It doesn't matter what particular diagnosis he has or hasn't. It's for insurance purposes. So for him, I would say to him, what is the symptoms that are preventing you from living the life that you want? And in fact, when I went on and joined NAMI, became the CEO of the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in San Diego, I would tell that to my staff as well. I would tell that to anybody who came to us, any family member as well, that we cannot focus on the diagnosis because of the stigma attached to it, but let's focus on what it is that's preventing us from living the life that we want to live. And then it also makes it much smaller, because the diagnosis sometimes can feel overwhelming. So if you're just focusing on the fact that, I'm hearing voices and that's my particular issue. Okay, let's focus on that. Or I can't get out of bed today. Okay, let's focus on that. So what's the quality of life sort of thing? And then my brother, 6 years later after his diagnosis, he was actually killed in the hospital. And I became a sister who lost a brother. And, there's a lot of, when you lose a sibling, a lot of people focus in on the parents, and rightly so. I am a mother of two. I never want to experience what my parents have experienced. However, the pain of a sibling is pretty profound as well. And it's interesting in society how we've not talked about the issue and the connectivity of siblings. And it's very ironic to me that when we have children, so we have young children in our house, there's a ton of books on how to, introduce your eldest to the youngest, how to, it's amazing how much is out there for youth and siblings, but nothing is out there addressing adults and siblings, or at least not stuff that I've come across. And when it comes to loss of a sibling, it's extraordinarily painful as well, especially when people would come up to me and say, "So how are your parents doing?" And I would answer, and then they would walk away and then turn around because it's an afterthought to ask me how I'm doing. And siblings, a lot of times we're going through protecting our parents because we want to make sure they're going to survive this loss. And then we have to deal with our own loss at the same time. So it's kind of this, interesting role. In fact, a lot of siblings I have found go through a lot of trauma with the loss because of the support that they need to give their parents. They want to become this perfectionist. They want to do everything to make up the loss of their sibling to their parents, let alone just deal with the loss as well. So what I have done now is I left NAMI after 15 years because I needed to write a book about siblings and really share the story and the message that if you've lost a sibling, or you have a sibling with a mental illness, you have a sibling with a drug and alcohol issue, you have a sibling with a chronic illness. Maybe they had cerebral palsy, they were born with some disorder. You're going through a lot of pain as well. And so my book is definitely geared towards mental illness. But I really think a lot of people of siblings with any health issue can kind of relate to it. The book starts where it's just the memoir piece of me and my brother. And then in the middle, I really put other sibling stories from different walks of life. So I only had my brother. I didn't have any other siblings. I was the oldest. So I wanted to include stories with the youngest, with multiple siblings, with step siblings as well. So that's in the middle. And at the end is more, it's not, I hate to use the word self-help because that's not what it is. My husband says it's like having a conversation with a friend over coffee. So I go into what I have found interviewing siblings is grief, anger, friendship, dynamic issues. I mean, I remember my brother being in a psychiatric hospital, my friend being at happy hour and having to choose which one. And at 21, 22 years old, I'd feel guilty if I would go with my friends, and I'd be resentful if I went and saw my brother. So, you're in this like no-win situation. And guess what? There's nobody to talk to. Because while I love my friends, they had no idea what I was going through at that time. So I go through a lot of those issues in the book as well to really help somebody know that they're not alone in the process.
There's so many things that you said that resonate with me specifically. Me and my brother were the only siblings. So when he passed, I was left alone, and I didn't have anybody really to help me through that. And it came at a time which was a month right after I graduated high school and a month before I went in the Army. So I didn't really have a whole lot of time to transition or grieve or have anything. I just sort of left one thing and jumped in another, and that's just the way my life went. And painfully, 13 years later is when I finally dealt with that. While I didn't have a mental illness, I certainly had PTSD, and I certainly had depression. I was reckless and dangerous in a lot of my actions because I was angry at God for taking my brother, and I was angry at myself for allowing him to die because that was my job. Even though I was the younger brother, I was the older brother mentally. Even though he was 3 years older, I was the role of the older brother since I was probably 7 or 8. And so I get your entire everything you said just like rang deeply inside of me, and I think there's a lot of people out there that are going through that, and you're absolutely right. There isn't anything out there for the sibling. There isn't that addressed topic where the sibling gets asked, how is he doing? No one ever asked me. No one. And it was, granted, I would never want to lose a child. I love my kids so much. And I know how, when I feel they're in danger, how scared I get. And I can only imagine what that feeling of loss felt like for my mom and my stepfather. But I had that same loss. I had that same feeling of despair and why and all those other things that go through it. So I think what you're doing is needed. A book like yours that addresses the loss that the surviving sibling goes through is important. What's the name of the book?
It's called The Forgotten Survivors. So
what was your brother's name?
Huh?
And what was your brother's name?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey.
Yeah. So
The Forgotten Survivors and Jeffrey. So let's talk a little bit about who Jeffrey was.
So my brother was an avid skateboarder. He was, like I said, a class clown. When he got older, kids would just flock to him. Like, they just loved him. And he was the type of person that cared about everybody that was around him. He just was that kind of gentle person. He was also this little small guy all through his high school years. So he was pretty teased a lot for his height. And then at 19, he jumped up to 6 feet tall.
Wow.
This happened. But some of the kind of abuse that he took in high school had already done some damage as well at that point. And he loved his family. So the one thing, that I will never regret is that my brother knew that I loved him. And not because I was good at that, but I was never allowed to leave him without a hug and I love you. Never. And that was because of him. So if he was at the hospital, and quite frankly, we were at a lot of hospitals, every time that 1 hour visitation, because, unfortunately, psychiatric hospitals aren't run the same as the rest of their hospital. But every time I'd have to leave, he would give me this big bear hug and say, I love you. And those are some excellent memories to have. In fact, a lot of times I've met with siblings over the years. Siblings have literally fallen apart in my arms because they've held on to this anger, which I understand, there can be cases where mental illness has created some situations in families that is harmful and hurtful. So I'd always say to a sibling, they have to take care of themselves first. However, knowing that, you can always change your mind if you decide you want to pull back in and then maybe need to pull back out and go back and forth. Because I've had so many siblings fall apart, 20, 30 years of no contact, no conversation, no connectivity, that they've lost Christmases, birthdays, niece and nephews, that sort of stuff. And now their brother or sister is gone. And, the only way to really understand the permanency of death is to experience it. It's really hard to understand that's a done deal at that point. So I encourage siblings to try to see what's best for them in that relationship. And I do talk about it a little bit in my book, even though I'm not the expert on abuse and violence in some situations. I had this different relationship. But my brother, he was an outdoorsy type person. He was my little brother. A pain in the butt half the time as well. Right? And I wish my kids knew him.
That's wow. I say that all the time. One of the biggest, when I wrote my book about my brother, I wrote it for me first and foremost because it was my therapy. It was I couldn't have spent $10,000 publishing a book any better with a shrink or someone else. That's first and foremost, it was for me. But secondly, it was because I wanted the world to know my brother, because opposite of my brother had autism before there was autism, and he had a severe stutter, which made him even less approachable, because when he spoke, his eyes would roll in his head and his face would contort. And so it wasn't necessarily an easy place to be is in a conversation with my brother. And I never had anybody call our house and say, can Andy come out and play? There was never an invite to a birthday party or a sleepover or anything like that. My friends were his only friends for the most part. And he didn't have that many. Not many people knew my brother because there wasn't the chance for him to be known. Mm-hmm. And so the book was my way of sharing my brother with people. And the most important thing that came from this was I wanted my kids to know their Uncle Andy.
Mm-hmm.
And because he would have been the greatest uncle ever. Because he'd still be living with me. Let's just be real honest.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I would have a room where I'm sitting now would probably be my brother's room. So, but he would have been the best uncle on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you say that you wanted them to know him, that means a lot. And that's something that, when you have a missing sibling or a mother or father that dies young, or it's that what could have been, and who that person could have been in your life, and the different parts of your life, and the people that have been in your life and out of your life through that period of time, where would he have fit in those moments? And I think that's one of the things that I look back on and I go, man, I really would have wished my brother was here to see this, or celebrated this with me. So those are moments that I get sad, but then I also think he accomplished so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I'm just from the short conversation we've had thus far, your brother, even though he had the voices in his head and he had that chaos brewing inside his head, he was there trying to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to be present in other people's lives.
Oh, he still took on the role of like the big brother. When I met my boyfriend at the time that became my husband, none of that, having the illness didn't prevent him from playing that role, checking out my husband and making sure all was good. But the illness prevented him from being at my wedding. So I don't have, I have family pictures that's missing one of the most important family members in it, which was also my decision at the same time. So that makes it even more difficult.
Well, being in the mental health space for as long as you've been in the mental health space, how did you, because I know how I didn't handle it, how did you handle the loss, and B, I would have to assume there was some guilt that resonated inside of you from whatever conversations that didn't go right, or things that were left unsaid, or moments that, like your wedding, that he wasn't a part of. I'm sure there was some level of guilt. How did you manage that? I think that's important for people to hear how other people dealt with things.
So, when he first died, because what happened to my brother became a kind of a media issue in San Diego because of what happened to him and his death. We were also thrown in kind of this limelight when we had to go to court, and they even, in order to decide how, what went wrong or whatnot, they had to put a value on the future of my brother's life, which, for them, it's a number. For me, it's a human being. So we were kind of thrown into the world of loss and media at the same time, media attention. So that was difficult. So for my parents, my mom actually, she got us into a 12-week grief share program. So for anybody who is experiencing the loss, for our family, that worked really well. And they're all over the nation. Or I can't say it worked well, but it was helpful. They do separate out kind of the spousal loss group and then everyone else, which again is difficult because siblings, running NAMI for all these years, we have a program called Family to Family. And Family to Family helps other family members that are going through having a loved one with a mental illness. Because you're going through a lot. Usually the police has been at your door, your loved one's in the hospital, you don't know what's happening or what's going next. And when siblings are at those meetings, because they're mostly parents, they're quiet, they don't speak, and they're doing it in respect of the parents. So I get why they're doing it, but they need a place to speak and be vocal themselves. So I would say that grief share is the same way. There wasn't a space for siblings, but it still was very beneficial to us. And we met weekly for 12 weeks. You kind of got to know everybody's loss. And it's storytelling too. So you're speaking about your loved one, because if any of you have experienced loss, you'll have noticed over the years that people don't bring up your brother or sister's name. They get uncomfortable if I try to bring up his name. But talking about my brother keeps him alive. It's not saddening. Yes, it's saddening, but it's also happy at the same time because I want to share his story. So then I actually tried therapy for a while, knowing that was probably a good thing. I mean, I ran a mental health company. I should go. And most people should go, and they shouldn't give up like I did, but I gave up. I I don't know if I was even in the right place for therapy at the time. And what I turned to was books. And I used books as an escape. I would read any fiction novel that I could get my hands onto. In fact, my husband once said to me, "We got to put a budget on how much you're reading." And I said to him, "Therapy is actually the same price, so and probably less. It's a win-win." But that was very important for me. And at the beginning, though, I had a lot of nightmares because of the way my brother was killed. I would have these recurring nightmares that why wasn't I there? So the night that he died, he was in the hospital, and I was supposed to go see him. But we decided that my mom was going to go visit and I was going to go the next day. So my husband and I went out to dinner instead. And while we were at dinner, he was killed. And, it's something you can't forget. I mean, knowing that I was enjoying a meal and my brother was dying is very difficult to deal with. And actually for a while, I couldn't even go to a restaurant. I couldn't do anything that was joyful because I did something fun at that time. So I was dealing with a lot of guilt over that I should have been there. That maybe if I had gone, I would have recognized the signs of what was happening and could have prevented it from happening. Over the years, some of that I've just had to let go. There's nothing that's going to bring him back. The only thing that I can do is to help other siblings at this point. But I am also taking care of myself as well, much more than I did. So he passed 11 years ago. So, today it took 11 years for me to get to the point of saying I have to take care of myself. And taking care of myself helps me to be a better mom, and also helps me to be a better advocate because I'm doing it more on my terms than on the guilt that I have to keep doing it, because if I stop, then people will think I didn't love him enough. But it's hard. Everyone has their own journey when it comes to grief, loss, guilt. Like I said, the one thing that I always have going for me is I can remember the last "I love you."
Wow. So 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say you had to let it go, for me, there was a defining moment, clear defining moment when that happened. Was the book your defining moment, writing the book? Was the process of writing the book? Was it the book is now written, now what?
Yeah.
What was when you decided to let it go and you realized that you had to start doing things to take care of you, which then allows you to do what you're doing for your brother from your heart rather than out of the guilty conscience or the feeling that you have to because of what others may think if you stop at the pace and veracity which you were doing it. What was that seminal moment, if there was one?
Well, and I will have to say, not every day I'm free of that. There are some days where I think, what am I doing? I need to get back in, hardcore advocacy work. Yeah, which is why I'm on a ton of boards, which is free as well. But I remember thinking a while ago that I needed to take some time away from the work that I was doing, but I wanted to be so involved in who was going to take over and how that was going to go and make sure the agency was going to be okay. And that really let me know that, I'm not ready. I can't do it yet. And then when I brought it back to my husband, in fact, I was starting to deal with physical health issues, specifically my gut. Heartburn all the time. I never experienced any of this stuff before, and I've had multiple pregnancies and didn't have any physical health issues. So I went to my husband. I was like, I think it's time. I need to step back. And I remember thinking this like weight was lifted. I didn't need to be a part of the planning process next. I went to an event that we had, and I knew it was going to be the last time I was at the event. And I was so happy. That made me know that I am making the right decision for my life at this point. And in some ways, I think I'm still a little bit floundering. I don't know if it's because I just need some time to kind of heal mentally and physically. But I'm not forcing myself into any action. And I wanted to write the book. I couldn't run a company, raise two little girls, and write the book at the same time. And so the book really became my focus.
So I would say that you had a moment where the separation from the thing that was keeping you from putting in what your life was and your journey with your brother on the paper, you had a limiting factor. The limiting factor was your job took up so much, and you were doing it for your brother,
Right.
but it was actually having a counter negative return. And I think when that final release of allowing yourself to say, okay, now it's time, and that happiness you felt being able to walk away from that without having to have the controlling component of it, where because I get that. I'm a complete control freak when it comes to leaving, my company with another person, and I get it. But that feeling of walking away, knowing that you did your job, that it served its purpose, but now it's not time for the next chapter. And I think that next chapter, i.e., became a book.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome. And I think that, I wrote my book, and I started writing it in 2002, and I self-published in 2006. And it took that long because it's just hard to live life in volume. So you have to take it in when it comes. And when I had a memory, I had a little recorder that whenever I had a memory pop into my head, I'd do a voice recording of it. And then when I had the energy to sit down and write that and really dive into that memory, I'd write it. And I just kept doing that until it got to the point where I felt like I'd accomplished what the book was supposed to do. The emotional and psychological release that was required of me was done. But it wasn't until, still to this day, but I mean, the healing after writing the book continued. Yeah. There wasn't like, whew, I'm good.
Right.
It was more of a, I'm on the right path. Is that kind of how you're feeling?
Well, I did signing the NAMI National Conference, and this young girl came up to me to have me sign her book, and I could tell that she was in a lot of pain, and she couldn't speak, and I have a feeling she didn't want to speak because if she did, she was going to start crying, which we all kind of get. So because I kept trying to prod it out of her. But knowing that she was taking home something, that even if she only read a little bit and put it down and picked it back up and put it down, that meant that there was another sibling out there that has experienced a similar pain that she's going through. Gosh, for me, that's where I am today. Knowing that there are other siblings who are doing this alone without any support at all. Just to help to be some sort of support for them in their journey of grief, loss, guilt, anger, all that sort of stuff.
If you had to nail down one emotion outside of sadness when your brother died, what would be the one that was just the most prevalent for the longest period of time?
Anger. Yeah.
I had a similar type, when the day my brother died, and I wish I had a memory of the last time he said, I love you. I would have to say he said it every night. Like he would yell from his bedroom and he said, I love you, Matt. I'd be like, I love you too, buddy. And that was our nightly ritual. And I'm sure it happened the night before he died. I just don't remember it, which sucks. But the day he died, so my parents, my mom and stepdad were away on vacation. We were away the week before. We came home. My dad had put a new clutch on my brother's car, and my brother was driving. And he was a good driver. He was like Rain Man, super safe, didn't do anything wrong. My dad had said, hey, just keep an eye on Andy's car, because I put that clutch in. If there's any issues with it, take him to work. And there wasn't any issues with his clutch. But part of me thinks if I would have just drove him to work that day and picked him up from work, that he wouldn't have died. And the reality is that my brother probably was going to die that day, whether he was sitting in a chair or driving in a car. He was unconscious before the accident, went into oncoming traffic and hit another car head on and died. And we didn't get an autopsy, but I believe that my brother had some sort of an aneurysm or something happened. And then he died, obviously, from the rest of the injuries that he had received. But that feeling of what if I would have drove him home, and would it be one more day that I had with him? Or would I've had that conversation on the way home with him and he died in the car with me? Mm-hmm. Where would that have made me feel better?
I know. I think it's the alone, knowing that he was alone when he died, that really kills me a lot. That I haven't been able to get past.
It sucks.
Yeah. Writing the book, I started writing it right after he died, and I had to stop. It wasn't the right time. I had to wait a little bit longer, but then I had these newborns, so that wasn't necessarily the right time either. And I've written the words, what happened to him. As you can tell, I'm not actually saying the words of what happened to him, and I don't think I want to read what I wrote again either. But I know it'll help other siblings at the same time. But I would say anger. I still have anger. It shouldn't have happened. But I think that he might have died no matter what happened that night in some ways, because of things that were external factors that were being done to him.
And I think, for me, and I don't know what your level of faith is or religious beliefs, for me personally, because I'm a control freak and I need to have the answers and I need to be able to solve problems on my own. And I just feel this burning desire to always know why things happen. And it was the one thing I could never get an answer to. And when I got done those 13 years of darkness in my life, the clarity and the light that came from that was a moment of grace from God that was given to me. And that, for me, was when I realized that the why is really unimportant. In the grand scheme of things, it's just not important. And when you sit back and you look, and I wrote the book, and then the things I discovered after I wrote the book were even more revealing than when I wrote the book. When I searched inside myself, the external validation I got from people, and I tell people this all the time: if you just take a step back and shut the hell up and listen to people, a lot of answers will be given to you. And what I learned was, growing up, my brother had no friends. Nobody came over. Nobody called. That was the life he lived with me. I never took into account that from June until August, he left to go to a Christian camp to be a maintenance worker, and he stayed there. And he did that there was a family friend who ran the camp, and they pretty much took care of Andy. And I didn't know what happened between June and August. I just assumed he cut some grass, right? Like that's what that all was to me. There was no value placed on that because I'd never been there. And what I found out was that the people that my brother connected with from June to August for those 4 years was unbelievable. To connect, they named kids after my brother. They built a gymnasium at this camp and put his name on the building. Like this type of, I would have never in a million years known about that because I never asked. I just assumed the person that lived with me for the first 18 years of my life was the same person who was going away from June to August. And I would venture to bet that there's probably stories like that about your brother, that on how he impacted somebody.
Oh yeah.
And I found out on Monday when I was talking to Dawn Sweeter that her daughter, who was she suffered with mental illness, wasn't diagnosed till very, very late. She was already a full fiend drug addict, heroin, meth, prescription pills, you name it. But her daughter was helping people while she was shooting up. She was helping people get into recovery.
Mm-hmm. I believe it.
And those are the stories that you wouldn't know unless you asked and
Mm-hmm.
listened. And I think if you ask people about your brother and let them just share the amazement of the greatness that your brother was, would be so profound that would be overwhelming to you, because it was to me. I'll give you one real quick example. When I sat in the church at my brother's funeral, I was hazed over because I was medicated, but there was 1,000 people there.
Mm-hmm.
And we have like 10 people in my family.
Mm-hmm.
And just my friends. So I'm like, okay, maybe 50 would show up. But there was 1,000 people, and I had no idea who they were for a decade. I had no clue who all these people were. And it turns out these are all the people that my brother touched from this camp. And that's, to me, when you die, your legacy is the things you did in the time that you were given.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be remembered? And I would have never thought in a million years that my brother would be remembered for anything other than the weird kid who stuttered, who was poor. Like, that's just what I thought he was going to be, my brother, and that was it. But it turns out he was 10 million things more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most beautiful thing I found about when I stopped asking why, and I just wrote and I shared, and then people would tell me stories, and I listened. That came from that.
Yeah, I remember when we were getting the funeral plan, people were asking, should they send flowers, blah, blah. And I would say, please just come, because I was so afraid nobody was going to show up. While we have good-sized family in some ways, it was only the 4 of us in San Diego. That was it. So I was so worried that my parents were going to be burying their son, and there was going to be nobody there to show love for them or him. And I remember walking in, and I also was in a haze of what was going on, but the entire church was packed. And I don't know if they were there necessarily for supporting us or for Jeff, but it didn't matter, because it just showed the love completely, which helped a lot to know how much his love and our love meant to other people as well. But, for you had a question there about religious, I will say that that's probably one of the hardest things. Is I was very religious before and really struggled with God afterwards. A lot of anger with it. And, the cemetery for me is an awful place. My parents visit often. I can't stand it. And in fact, I read about this in the book, to go over like angel anniversaries and what to do and what not to do. And in fact, it doesn't matter. It matters what it feels right to you. So some people might enjoy might be a strong word, but might feel some peace going to the cemetery. Some people might need to do what I do, which is absolutely nothing. On the day of my brother's death every year, I kick my kids and my husband out of the house, and I just stay in, and I either read a book or watch a movie. But it's my choice. And you know what? It's my choice to change what I do next year as well. Maybe I will decide to go. But I kind of address those sorts of things in the book too, about loss.
What's the date of your brother's death, if you don't mind me asking?
April 11th.
What year?
2008.
2008. Oh, I'm an April baby, so I'll remember that. And I just wanted to know that because I wanted you to say it. That date. My brother's was July 12th, 1989.
So, yeah, I remember being pregnant with my first, and actually being worried because her birth was going to come up around that date, and being petrified that she could potentially be born on April 11th or even in the month of April. I was just freaking out over it. And I remember my mom, my daughter came 2 months early, and she came on April 1st of all days. She comes on April 1st. And I remember my mom saying to me that it's a blessing for her, and not for her, for all of us as a family to have her born in this month. And this month has a lot of good things too. My mother's birthday is in it. My wedding anniversary is in it. So there's these beauties. But when you're going through loss, it's amazing how much you can attach. I don't know if you ever did that, but in the first year, every time I saw the number 11 too, it would kind of give me heart palpitations. That's what I think when you're experiencing grief for a period of time, you really attach on to these, what might seem to other people as insignificant, but they're really big, because they represent a loss that's really big.
I know my brother was born June 3rd. And so I just know once his birthday comes,
Mm-hmm.
about 6 weeks from the date that he died. And so it's this, I'm proud to honor my brother's death, but it's like, I love Christmas up until Christmas.
Yeah.
I dread my brother's anniversary of his death until the day it happens, and that day I honor it. So it's the opposite. I dread it leading up, and then because I know after June 3rd, it's bound to come the next 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah,
I found this to be the case, and I've talked to a lot of people about this as well. Is that in March, I'd always turn into a horrible person. I'd just be snappy, quick decisions, and at the first couple of years of his angel anniversary, I didn't recognize what was happening to me. And by the third year, I realized, wait a second, I think it's because we're getting closer to his anniversary date that I almost, subconsciously was just getting aggravated, upset, and snappy so quickly. So once I figured it out, then every March I can do a little bit more work around self-care so that I don't take it out on my loved ones around me. But it's amazing. It's those weeks right before the death that are actually much harder than the date itself. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, listen, I think, what we shared today was obviously very personal, but I think can also help a lot of people. I think the fact that you wrote a book that, I wrote a book which was simply therapy for me, mm-hmm. that turned into something that many people have enjoyed and found comfort in. But your book had intention of having a purpose of helping someone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's brave, because to write a book with that, something so personal, and then have the plan and the vision and the intention of it being intentionally helpful to someone else takes a lot, because you have to go into multiple different mindsets when you write the kind of book you wrote. And I truly do appreciate it. From a sibling who lost a sibling to another, I will say thank you very much. And I do plan on getting a copy of that. Where can people find your book, learn more about you, your speaking that you do, all the advocacy work you do for mental health? Where can they find more information? So
everything about me is pretty easy to find. My name is Shannon Jaccard, and that's my website. So it's SHANNON, Jaccard's JACCARD.com. So you can find me there. And then my book, else you can find on my website, but I'll show you a little picture too. This is it.
Oh, yeah. Hold that up. Move it over to your right a little bit.
All right.
There you go. Perfect. Woohoo! There it is.
So you can find it on Amazon, like, every other book. It's on there. I let it on for Kindle Unlimited as well. So if you are an avid reader like me, it's part of the Kindle Unlimited sort of stuff. So that's free. It's on the ebook, and it's obviously the hard copy as well. That's there.
Well, thank you, Shannon. I honestly thank you. Once I knew I'd booked you for the show, and I knew this would be a personal one for me, just because it's always good to share, even though it's something painful, something that's similar with another person who understands what the other one's going through. Yeah. So I do appreciate you coming on, and personally it helped me just sort of validate some of the things that I went through and felt. And I think that hopefully if there's someone on the show, watching the show that has lost a sibling, that, they buy a copy of your book, and do that self-help, that self-healing that's required. And, for 13 years, I didn't do that. I just ran, and I knew I was broken and I couldn't get out of it. And now that I'm not, life is so much better. So I just think there is a way out of the darkness. It doesn't mean that the pain gets less, or the sadness gets less, or the missing them gets less. It's just how you manage that and handle it inside your own mind and spirit is what changes.
Yeah.
Hang tight. Don't go anywhere. I'll make sure I put links to your website, everything else in the comments on Facebook. So hang tight. We're going to talk offline. Everyone, thank you for watching this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you to my very special guest, Shannon Jaccard, for sharing her personal journey of loss, her understanding of mental illness and how it affects families, and just her overall amazing spirit and how she's come through the darkness and just has a purpose of helping people get through theirs. So thank you again, everybody. God bless and be kind to one another.